Good? Online? Who's good? Yeah? Sweet. Well, welcome to session 2 of our Spring Tech Forum 2012. Before Zach introduces our speaker, I'm just going to go over a few things real fast. Everybody should have a feedback card. Yes, hold it up. Those we definitely want. Those are how we know whether you like the speakers and whether to bring them back in the future. So please give us your feedback and make sure you leave a comment to be entered into the t-shirt contest. We'll be giving away a drawing about 2 or 3 at the end of the day. So we'll email you if you want to get your size. You can pick it up. Also, there's workshops going on. There's the Lockpicking Village over in the Small Commons. There's also the Career Fair going on all crazy outside of here. So make sure you stop by. This is a great opportunity for you guys to get to know local people that can hire you. So do it. And so Zach's going to introduce our next speaker.
What's up, everyone? My name is Zach Stater. I am UAT's Public Relations Chair. Welcome again to Spring 2012 Tech Forum. Our next speaker is Vincent Liu, Managing Partner of Sachin Liu. Contracts for Fortune 1000 companies. Does penetration testing, used to be an analyst for the NSA. I'm sure most of you that are here already know about him. And apparently he's going to tell us about Star Wars too. So without further ado, Mr. Vincent Liu.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. I'm actually very honored to be here talking to a group like this who's as technically focused and sort of oriented about pen testing or security as what we have here. I know a number of you in the crowd, but I'm curious actually, how many of you are in NetSec? Okay, good number. So the CS program? It's like 3.
Oh yeah.
And forensics? Anybody from forensics? Anybody from any other group? Game designers? Is that cool. Glad you can make it. What we're going to talk about today is essentially what makes a good pen tester and what makes an even better pen tester. What are the differences? What are the qualities that make up those folks? And in my experience, my background is I've worked in security, I've worked in consulting for Fortune 100 on the other side of the fence for industry. I've worked in government intel, and I've seen and I've met a lot of different folks. I've had to manage a lot of different people. And one of the most important things that I have to do, is I'd be able to identify and differentiate between the different skill sets that people have. And that's what this presentation is about, is how do you go about doing that? What are the different levels of skill that people have when they're doing pen testing? And what is it that differentiates people? How many of you have ever done any pen testing professionally? Cool. Anybody unprofessionally pen test? Yeah, some maybe. I read the news. So like I said, my background is I've been pen testing since '99. I've been around for a very long time, since very early on when pen testing was kind of just getting started as an actual thing that you could sell to companies. I've done work against top 100 websites, against the glass cockpit that goes into the Boeing 777 to frozen waffle factories, and among all of those things, despite the variety of environments, despite all of that, those skills that you take into a situation like that, when you're trying to break the system, when you're trying to find the loophole or find the bug or the logic issue that you take advantage of to actually break in, those skills can pretty much be condensed and grouped into a very, very small set. So, about pen testing, how do you guys define pen testing? Anyone? How would you define a penetration test? What is a pen test? Yes?
Finding vulnerabilities in a network or, say, code or applications, something like that, a way to get into the system.
Sure, looking for vulnerabilities in a system, in code, in networks. Any other definitions? Well, sure. Yeah, seeing how secure something is, right? Those both are on the right track. And another way to look at it is it's essentially simulating a real-world attack against a target network or an application. So a pen test And we're being very specific here. The semantics of a pen test are very important to keep clear. A pen test is a simulation against a as real world as possible against a target network or an application with the goal of breaking in. Because you can have different types of assessments. Now, assessments is a broader term. Assessments is essentially taking a look at something, doing a review, looking for vulnerabilities. But a pen test, the goal of a pen test is essentially to find a way to break in. You know, there's many different types. There's pen testing. There's vulnerability assessment or vulnerability scanning, right? That's another way of looking at things. And vulnerability scanning is basically just going out there and looking for, you know, using an automated tool, scanning things, looking for different types of things. But you're not going to actually take it to the next level. You might identify and confirm, but you're not actually going to exploit. You're not going to take it deeper. You're not going to penetrate. Risk assessment is generally more focused on identifying a vulnerability, figuring out what the likelihood of exploitation would be, looking at some of the other things like impact, and coming up with a way of representing that, some value or some way of quantifying the risk. That's the main goal of a risk assessment. So why do people perform pen tests? Anyone? Yes.
Test and see if there's any breach in their systems, like how sometimes quote-unquote China tries to penetrate their systems, so they need like their own people to simulate an attack on their systems. So they try to find the loopholes, the bugs
Trying to find bugs?
in their systems.
Sure. Anyone else?
To fix security flaws before they become a problem.
Fix security flaws before they become a problem. Right. Sure. Another way to look at it is we perform pen tests, and people perform pen tests because, and this is important because there's a lot of bait and switch. I mean, just even among this, there's a lot of bait and switch out there, even in the industry today. If you go into the real world, people will sell you a pen test but maybe only do a vulnerability scan. And it's actually a big source of confusion and a big source of problem, because people then start to say things like, well, pen tests, they're not worth anything. I didn't get anything out of it. It's probably because you didn't do the right thing. You didn't pay for the right thing, or somebody sold you something and did the old bait and switch on you. The reason that you get a pen test is because it answers the question, can someone break in? That is the goal, right? If your question is, how many vulnerabilities do I have, and I want to identify all of them, then you'd probably go about it in a very different way. A pen test is, can somebody break in? We're going to find one path in, and that's all we need to actually be successful. That's the question that answers. A pen test is very specific. And the thing is that companies don't perform penetration tests. People perform penetration tests. So one of the things that we always advise our clients when we're going out there and we're talking to them is to say, well, if you're going to be evaluating, you know, company A versus company B versus company C, the important thing to keep in mind is who is doing your test. The people behind it is what you're really paying or what you're really going after. That's what's important. So this leads us to the meat of our presentation, which is, what are the different types of people that you could hire? What are the different levels, the skill levels that you could potentially have? The first is, of course, your novice, right? These are the people who are just very basic, you know, kind of your plain vanilla testers, not that sophisticated. You've also got more advanced testers, right? So the advanced people have a little bit more skill, maybe some more training, more experience. They can identify things a bit better. They might take it to the next level. You also have your experts. You've got expert penetration testers. These guys basically are, you know, pretty much the cream of the crop, some of the best that are out there. And my experience, you know, a much smaller percentage of the actual pen testers out there are actually experts. A lot of people claim to be experts. You know, we've worked with a number of people. We contract with a number of people. We interview a lot of people. So a lot of people claiming to be experts. Very rarely do you run across an expert, and even more rare is the master. The master is somebody that you will rarely encounter. Some people never run into master pen testers. These people are incredible at what they do. Absolutely incredible. Yes?
How come they're all evil in this slide?
Well, yeah, you know, it's a good question. It's a good question. What's the difference between these guys? What, you know, in your mind, what is the difference between these guys, other than the fact that, yeah, it just depends on your perspective. What's that?
So novice can't use force powers.
The novice does not have the force, and they progressively dress in darker colors. and you know,
They get taller.
they get. I made them taller, but they wear more cotton. You know, they're a little more relaxed. The better you get.
Does the expert overtake the master at some point?
They get thrown over the light side.
But then he becomes the master.
No more comments. No more comments. But in reality, I mean, like from a pen testing standpoint, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? You know, is the difference between the novice and the advanced, the expert, and the master? I mean, in your opinion, what makes people good or bad?
Motivation, dedication.
Motivation, dedication.
How far they're willing to go.
Yeah, that'll always make the difference.
Their knowledge of tools and systems and how they know how to exploit them in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Practice, a lot of those things. So novice, let's start with the first one, novice people, right? The novice folks, you know, basically, I'd say about 80% of the population, you know, where I don't know, I feel like I've interviewed probably all of them, you know, a lot of painful phone conversations, painful in-person meetings even. The barrier to entry is really low for the novice guys, right? I mean, if you can spell pen test these days, you can pretty much hang up a shingle and start trying to sell pen test services or call yourself a pen tester. I mean, I've seen that. You know, a lot of people put it on the resume, and then you get into a phone interview, and all they're trying to do is fool the other person on the other end of the line. You know, there's a lot of novice people out there. Now, with the novice, what we find is that they tend to be very checklist oriented. You know, a lot of companies out there will say like, okay, well here's a top 10 list. I'm going to go through these. I'm going to, you know, run through these checks, use a tool that tells me, that says, oh, I run through these checks, and they're very tool reliant. I mean, that's actually a big problem, not just in pen testing, but in other areas of security as well, being overly reliant upon your tools. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the other thing is that they also just take the results from the tool, they validate it, oftentimes poorly, come up with a bunch of results, oftentimes with false positives, and they just chuck that over the fence and say, well, this is your pen test. It's a sad state of affairs, but more often than not, this is what you run into. And if you guys anyone plan on being or want to be a professional pen tester at some point? Yeah? Maybe some of you guys are already, or unprofessional. You know, I mean, this is what's out there. I mean, the bar is low right now with these 80%. But as long as you know where you fall, you can always work to get better. A lot of things, you know, ways to identify whether you're working with a novice. Questions you can ask yourself is, you know, if your primary means of pen testing revolves around a tool or running a tool, and if somebody asks you a question, or you can ask somebody if you're trying to evaluate their skill, what would you do if you didn't have the tool? Ask them that question and see what their response would be. See if they understand the underlying mechanism behind how the tool works. Because if they do, then it's likely that they're going to be a little bit better than the average person who just knows how to configure the tool and run it and look at the results. You can train anybody to run a tool and look at the results. But that's the novice pen tester. Now, on the topic, any questions, actually? Okay. On the topic of over-reliance of tools, one of the quotes that I always like to think of in the situation is, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that tends to be a big problem in the industry, is that there's a focus on using tools, but the issue with using tools as sort of the guiding force behind a pen test, and this is what novices do, is that you're hamstrung by the very same limitations that the tool has. If 90% of your work is going to be using a tool, and your tool has certain limitations, then 90% of your work is going to be subject, or have the same fallacies and same problems as that tool does. If your tool has a weakness, your approach is going to have a weakness, and you're not going to be comprehensive. You're not going to be able to do as good of a job as you should. Tools are treated as the end as opposed to a means to an end. It's very easy to get tunnel vision with this, but as much as people do bag on tools, there's a flip side to it as well, and that is that human productivity varies, and there is no way that a professional can get their job done these days without using a tool. In many, many instances, I mean, as time goes on, if you're on a pen test, Dre, I see you laughing. Is that,
Popcorn or the pen test or something.
but this is, I mean, when you're sitting in front of a laptop, you're not a robot. You can't sit there forever, right? You can't churn through and try to brute force a directory of every possible combination. You can't do those combinatorics. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your customer or client's money to be spending time doing that. Your productivity is going to vary, and you might have brief moments of insight or creative genius, but not for 12 hours or 20 hours at a time. You just can't keep it up. But at the same time, tool productivity, very consistent, very strong, keeps going. Except for certain instances where tools do fail, and people always point out, well, it requires human interaction at certain points in time, and other things like that. But the fact is that a tool is very consistent. A tool can crawl through your entire website very quickly in an automated fashion. It can test for known files or known file extensions and do a lot of those combinatorics, a lot of that testing for you, right? So testing actually does have to have tools. It also has to have a human component. A lot of times, human testers will miss vulnerabilities. It's especially the novices. And when you start seeing this, it's pretty much a very, very strong giveaway. False positives, false negatives, things like that. When you start seeing many of these, then you're very much probably dealing with a novice pen tester. These are the people that you want to make sure that you don't get, or that as a customer, you don't want to have this. You don't want to have this type of person on your project. This goes back to the saying that companies don't perform penetration tests. People do. And it's the people that really matter. So, how do you get from novice to advanced? Any ideas?
Like not an internship, but maybe finding someone that knows the knowledge and basically learning from them, like a tutelage.
Yeah, like tutelage, like mentoring, getting some like hands-on knowledge. I mean, back in the day, like 10 years ago, that was the only way you could learn it. Was you have to find a group of people who were really interested in it as well, and somebody might take you under their wing and start showing you the ropes. 10 years ago, there wasn't a bunch of schools teaching this type of stuff. There weren't even books. I mean, there's very few publications about this stuff.
I was going to say read 40,000 books, or about 10,000.
Read 10,000 books.
10,000 books.
I mean, years ago that wasn't available, but what's awesome now is that a lot of that is actually available. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge about this type of stuff out there. And what it takes is studying. You can study on your own, and that's what will get you from novice to advanced. One of the big differences between the novice pen testers, which is where sadly many people are, and perhaps even more sadly where most people remain. To get from novice to advanced, one of the keys is studying on your own. Hours upon hours upon hours and upon hours of study. No joke, that's what it takes. You have to put in the effort. You have to spend your weekends, you have to spend your free time studying this stuff. The people who just do it 9 to 5, day in, day out, don't really get that much better, that much faster. It's the people who really take it to the next level, go above and beyond. And that drive, that willpower is very, very important in terms of getting into that next tier of tester. Skills can be acquired, knowledge can be acquired. These types of things you can study for. The big debate about whether or not it's pen testing, being an amazing pen tester is are you born a good pen tester? Can you learn how to be a good pen tester? Well, up to the advanced level, the answer is yes. You can learn how to be a better pen tester. You can be better than just the 80% that is out there. Even if you find a job or an internship, you can continue to develop your skills that way. It's extremely, extremely useful to have that real-world hands-on experience. So, what are the characteristics of an advanced penetration tester? First of all, they use tools, just like everybody else does, but they don't see it as the end state. It's more of a means to an end. It's a way of accomplishing a job or a task. And so in many ways, just like a carpenter has his or her hammer and lathe or measuring tape. The advanced pen tester has a suite of tools that he or she uses. Exploratory testing. Exploratory testing is understanding that pen testing is more than just scanning, identifying a vulnerability, and then just trying to see if it's a cross-site scripting or SQL injection or a buffer overflow, that one single check. That's not pen testing. That's just vulnerability identification. So with exploratory testing, what that means is it's very much like what you do when you don't feel well and you go into the doctor. And you sit down and the doctor says, well, all right, why don't you describe some of your symptoms? And then they send you to a few tests. And you come back with the results. And then you look at those results, and they might send you to more tests. And they come back. And you keep going through that process of exploring the different options and narrowing down and figuring out what the evidence has to show you until you diagnose the problem. That's very similar to what pen testers will do. You interact with the system and you test it. You get feedback. And then based on that feedback, you refine your approach and you go back again. And then you figure out if there's another way in. So it's this back and forth of figuring out and exploring the different options that are out there until you identify or diagnose whether a vulnerability exists, and then you exploit it. And once you get to that point where you confirm that it exists and that you can exploit it, you go through the same process of testing and refining and testing. The interesting thing about pen testing, if you've ever done it professionally, you realize that 80–90% of your time is actually spent information gathering and analyzing that information. Very little amount of your time is actually spent sitting there exploiting the crap out of something. It just doesn't happen. I mean, you spend all this time building up and preparing to get to that point where you can actually execute that exploit. And once you've executed that exploit, you go right back into the information gathering, analysis, exploratory testing phase where you're basically gathering more data. A lot of it is analysis. So you also start to use testing patterns. A lot of things you start becoming more familiar to you. You might say, oh, here's a login box. There's X, Y, and Z that I can perform against it. I can do brute forcing. I can look for SQL injection vulnerabilities. I can look for information disclosure issues. Those types of things are all very common. You start seeing these patterns and being able to identify vulnerabilities much quicker. Manually, oftentimes, you start looking at business logic issues that you may have seen in the past, so you start applying experience to it as well. That's another really good way of seeing who the advanced penetration testers are. Also being able to perform more complex exploitation. Exploit chaining comes into play here. So being able to use multiple exploits in combination with one another. And we'll see an example of that later on. I've actually taken a real-world example and I've scrubbed it for you guys so you can see what a real, true, complex, multi-stage exploit looks like against a real web application. So you guys can see I've taken some screenshots and cleaned it up so you can see how that actually takes place. But after a certain point, advanced pen testers, you hit a wall. There's only so much you can study. There's only so much effort you can put into it until you do hit a wall. And there's a certain point at which, certain skills or talents or the way that you think will actually make the difference between being advanced and being an expert. So the expert. What is it that makes an expert different than, say, the advanced or the novice? What makes the big difference?
Probably the ability to create your own tools, and basically be able to create the tools that they use, and not just use the tool, know the ins and outs of the tool that they created.
Creating your own tools, knowing the ins and outs of the tools. Yes?
Are they kind of like Dr. House, where they can just go in and diagnose the problem in a few minutes, no matter how crazy and complex it is?
It's interesting because, like House, right? Going in and diagnosing a problem very quickly, being able to apply. Actually, this is one of the big hallmarks is being able to apply your experience and the patterns that you've seen in a very quick fashion, right? Being able to see that, you can very quickly rule out you can very quickly rule out what some possibilities are, and you can essentially narrow down the field of what the potential vulnerabilities or what the potential exploit path could actually be. And that's what really sets apart the expert pen testers, right? There's a number of things. The first is being able to synthesize disparate data points, being able to take information from point A and point B and point C, which are seemingly unrelated, and bring them together. The ability to build attack avenues or attack paths or attack trees in your mind, and being able to figure out, okay, very quickly, out of all the possible, symptoms, there could be X number of branches of decisions that we'd have to go down, but based on experience, based on patterns, you narrow those down very, very quickly until you can actually target and exploit in a very efficient manner as an expert pen tester, and also finding patterns in this seemingly unrelated information, bringing it all together. You can give somebody tools, you can give them techniques, you can give them instructions on how to do things, but in the very same way that you might give somebody a canvas and a paintbrush and paint, if you gave it to me, you'd wind up with something worthless. But if you gave it to the right person, those same tools and techniques in the right hands, they could come up with a piece of art. Right? It all depends on the person behind the paintbrush. In this case, it all depends on the person behind the keyboard and what they're able to do with the particular environment, using their experience, using those tools and those techniques, and also how they think about things. So thinking about things is extremely important. These are the artists. Synthesis and patterns, right? Synthesis can be a good thing, and synthesis and bringing together two things can also be bad. So basically being able to find patterns and discrepancies and bring them together requires, one, a deep knowledge of how the technology works. So all expert pen testers will truly, and if they don't already, will learn exactly how something works, the ins and outs of everything. The expert pen tester will know to all the idiosyncrasies, to the smallest detail, how a system functions, because they're going to take advantage of that in the exploitation of that system. At the same time, that information allows them to bring information that may seem unrelated together in a useful way. But that doesn't just mean, synthesis doesn't mean you can slam together any pieces of information. Bad synthesis can occur as well. There are things that if you just take random pieces of information and try to push it together and make sense of it, it won't work. Keep these in mind. Now, these are all theoretical, but I'll show you in a few slides what I actually mean by synthesis. Bringing together seemingly unrelated pieces of information. Also, attack visualization. It's like playing chess. How many of you play chess? It's an extremely high percentage. Far fewer, I think, among the general population. When you play chess, you're thinking ahead, right? You're thinking, if I move my knight here, their bishop might do this, their pawn might do this, they might castle. You think ahead, 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. An expert penetration tester has the ability to think ahead. If I trigger this in the application state changes, and perhaps another avenue of attack opens up. And if I take advantage of that attack avenue, then that will actually give me access that I've been waiting on based on a completely separate vulnerability that might have been sitting there. Being able to visualize and see these attack trees and these attack patterns, when you're playing chess and you're going through and you're basically figuring out, okay, these are my options, you can pretty quickly rule out some of the poor options, because you've got experience doing it. You've got a limited set of options left. And an expert is able to see that pattern very quickly and weed out or trim those paths that don't make sense. So you can spend your time focusing on the ones that have the highest likelihood of success, or the best option in the particular situation. That's what attack patterns are like. That's what expert pen testers do. When you go through and you exploit something, you have to make these decisions, you have to think ahead, and you have to figure out exactly what your environment is going to do and how it's changing every step of the way. So, what does this actually mean? So this is an example of a real application that we've kind of scrubbed some of the identifying information out of. It's an example of synthesis. It's an example of bringing together various pieces of information, seemingly unrelated, looking for patterns that we may recognize, and also visualizing the attack path. So we were looking at an application and happened to have a content.php page. And the parameter to it for the page parameter was test, right? So we saw there's a parameter. We put in test just as a baseline to see what was going on. And we got back a response. It says page not found. Okay, so this is how the application behaves, right? We're testing it. We're exploring the application, seeing what it does. So we keep going. We explore some more. The next thing that we do is we change test equal to, does anybody recognize what kind of attack this is? Yes.
I don't know what it's called, but you're trying to go back to the root directory and then get to the etc password.
Right, you're trying to go back to the root directory and get the etc password. This is called directory traversal. I'd call on the professionals that I see in the audience, but it's not fair. That's exactly what it is. This is trying to pass in a relative path to a parameter to gain access to a file that you normally wouldn't have access to using a directory traversal issue. Now, what's interesting is that, or maybe not so interesting, is that you get the same response out of it, right? Page not found. It doesn't see it. So we keep going. We try again, right? Next step. Well, now what we do is we add a %00 onto the end of that string. And we get a different response, a very interesting response. What does the %00 do?
Isn't that a null byte?
Yes.
That afterwards it just doesn't see anything afterwards.
Right. So this is the null byte. So the %00 is a URL encoded form of the null byte. And in the C programming language, what terminates a string?
Null.
The null, right? So in many cases, if by injecting a null byte into this particular parameter, what you actually get is you actually cut off anything afterwards. It's a way of truncating the input. So the way the application handles this input is going to be different than its normal behavior. And what we do see is that there's a different response coming out of it. So this is the exploratory nature of testing and the ability to gather information, to get feedback from it. Now, this is the actual error that came back from that page. What does this mean? This is where knowing the details about the system actually come into play. This is where I'll call on you, Joe, if nobody else has any feedback.
Could you now just write any code you want and have it executed arbitrarily? Now, because you could put a null character and then after that null character write code and have it exploited or executed.
Close. You're on the right track, right? Because what we're seeing here is eval, an eval statement, right? Something is going on in the PHP here. What else do we see in the error message?
The file structure.
It's on line 23, right? So in content.php, there's an eval statement. And somebody else had some structure?
Yeah, the file structure of what boxes hosting the site on.
Sure, absolutely, right? Imagine we're all pen testers right now. We're collecting information. Now we see exactly where the content.php is located. So now we're seeing directory structure. We can store that away and we can use that later. And in fact, directory structure becomes very important because later on you'll see that we actually will. We're squirreling away this information. Every single piece of disparate data that you might think is irrelevant now actually becomes very relevant. Anyone else? What else do you see? Joe?
What? Unexpected colon? Is it because it's file colon in the code?
Unexpected colon. Where would a colon show up? Where did the colon come from? It wasn't in our input anywhere.
It's in the code.
Which code?
In the PHP document you're reviewing, content.php.
Ah,
And it's file.
very close.
Or it includes in the content.php.
Includes, right. It's located in the file that's being evaled. So what's happening, Where do you find a colon in a file? What's an Etsy password?
Oh, that's the first delimiter.
Exactly. The colon is the delimiter between the various fields in the Etsy password file. And normally people think colon, oh yeah, colon, probably got something happened there. What happened was the Etsy password file was successfully read. It was passed to the eval on line 23 in content.php, and it errored out on the first line because the first line is where the colon shows up. So what's happening is whatever file you're passing to the page parameter for content.php actually gets evaled by content.php on line 23. So now we're getting somewhere, right? So we did a little bit of exploratory testing. We understand how the system is working. And in order to understand this, you have to know about the Unix structure, the file structure for the Etsy password file. You need to know about a couple of those vulnerabilities. You're learning information about where the file is actually laid out, what the eval call actually means in PHP, how it processes things, error messages from the system entirely. So what we have so far is we know that we have a directory traversal vulnerability, null byte injection on top of that, the ability to read any file on the system by simply doing directory traversal and null byte injection, and then to get it sent to the eval function for execution. There's no smoking gun here yet. There's no smoking gun, but this is what we've got. So we put this in our piggy bank, and we come back to it. So we keep exploring the application, and checking on my time. We try to look for other vulnerabilities, right? We keep exploring. So we keep looking like, well, is there a SQL injection anywhere? Well, we found another one called download.php, file equals XYZ. We keep testing it. We put in a single quote. You put in the single quote into that particular parameter, and you get a different response come back. And what you essentially do is you go through this process of identifying and exploring that vulnerability until you do figure out that eventually there is a SQL injection vulnerability, that you can actually get it to display data. And the way that you get it to display data is by using a certain crafted query string. Now, in order to get here, you actually have to understand SQL injection. You have to understand the back-end system. You actually have to understand how to exploit SQL injection beyond just using the tools. And you need to know exactly how the back-end system is functioning. And what we eventually figured out was that you could, by putting in, you see that BBB, that information that's being displayed, it's saying file not found, something, 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 BBB, and you can see that BBB is actually the fourth field out in the union select in a SQL injection attack. So we know that we can, by injecting this particular attack string, begin to extract information from that BBB field, right? That information is being redisplayed to us. That's what we know so far. So what if we do something different? Instead of BBB after AAA, we'd actually drop in another command. This command actually is designed to extract information out of the vulnerable backend database. And through this technique, we actually are able to extract hashes from the backend database through that BBB field. So then password hashes come back instead of the information BBB. So we've identified a data extraction ability to read password hashes from the backend database, usernames and then password hashes. So for this site now, we know that we have those vulnerabilities we identified earlier. We also have SQL injection and the ability to extract data. Now we have multiple vulnerabilities. But we haven't brought it all together yet. It's still disparate information. But what's next? Well, we keep exploring the application. We happen to find an exposed administrative interface. But fortunately, because we were able to have SQL injection on the backend database, we were able to get the usernames and passwords. Right? So now what we know is we have all of the things before. We have directory traversal, null byte injection, the ability to read any file on the remote system, the ability to eval any code that we could potentially at some point get onto that system. In addition to that, we on the right-hand side, through SQL injection, we were able to steal credentials, crack those credentials, gain also through an exposed admin interface, we're able to pull down and gain access to the administrative interface. So, we have admin access to the content management system now, which is what that admin access was. But let's take it another step. Let's bring it all together now, right? So the right side gave us access to the content management system. The left side is a bunch of vulnerabilities waiting for us to find a way to upload PHP code to the server so that we can actually execute it and execute command execution on the remote server. So bringing it all together, this is where the experts really excel. Taking all of these various random vulnerabilities, seemingly unrelated, putting them together, chaining them now. What you do is you want to upload this one line. This one line of PHP will allow us to execute commands after the CMD parameter in a URL. We need file upload capability. We need to be able to send it to a writable directory if we're going to be able to upload files. And we need to be able to identify where that file was uploaded to so we can point content.php to that file. So the exploit, what we did was, after some testing and experimentation, we were able to figure out that we could actually send through the content management system, upload the PHP code to a particular location, because you're able to modify and update things. We're able to send that PHP code up into the system, into this particular directory, the writable file location, and it actually was renaming all of the files that we were uploading into incremental integers, right? In this case, it was the 892nd file. So we take this, we package it up into an exploit string, we go back to the content.php vulnerability, and then we append cmd equals ID, and what this should return to us is the ID of the system, right? It should execute the ID command. So basically what we were able to do after this CMD example, after the CMD parameter, was basically tie together and actually execute commands on the system. And what this involved was essentially 12 separate steps, 12 separate vulnerabilities in an exploit chain that led to the full compromise of the remote server. This is what an expert pen tester does, is he brings together all of these types of issues, knowing the systems, every single one of the systems on the back end, being able to piece it together. That's the key. Not just looking at something and saying, oh yeah, it's SQL injectable, or yeah, here's a buffer overflow, I can exploit it. This is really truly what separates the experts from the rest. The ability to think about this in this way. This is a cool exploit chain. This is what you want to strive for. Any questions? So then there's the master. In your lifetimes, you may or may not have the ability to meet somebody with this level of skill. I have met a handful, and I've been around for quite some time, and I've met a lot of different people, and even then, only a very, very small percentage of the people you meet will actually be master penetration testers. These, you might think security researcher or whatever, they're great, they're very smart, but it's a different skill set, being able to really, truly do live, actual, real pen testing and security research. Very different operating conditions. So people always struggle. A lot of people strive to be a master. Everyone starts out the career wanting to think I'm going to be the master. You know what? And some people do achieve it. Most people don't. And a lot of people struggle to define what it is that actually a master brings to the table. Describing it, fortunately, has already been done, and I think one of the best quotes, best ways of describing it, is a quote. If any of you guys recognize it before the end of this quote, definitely feel free to shout it out. Let's see if this works. Was it going?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. This is always, when I was 17 years old and I was just trying to get started on all this stuff a long time ago, this is how I felt. I thought I was going to be the best. I wanted to go out there and be the absolute baddest guy out there. It didn't matter what it took. But it takes something else. It is something else to get to be a master. You can get to the, if you study hard and you work hard, you can get to be an advanced pen tester. If you're lucky enough to be able to think outside of the box, to have the ability to piece these patterns together and get that far, you can become an expert. You're lucky enough to have those talents and the ability to think like that. The master, though, is a different beast. There's one thing that separates the master from everybody else. And time again in my experience when I've met with these folks, it is essentially, basically the fact that they never give up. They don't stop, no matter what. I see a lot of people take it as a personal pride point. They will not give up until they break into the system. And when you see these people at work, there's no amount of interviewing, there's no amount of talking to them, there's no amount of anything that you can do to know that you're working with a master. But it is, again, we're going back to the art example. There's no amount of interviewing a Van Gogh or a Picasso or a Monet. You can't interview them and tell that they're a master. The way that you tell is by looking at their work, by seeing what they do. That's how you tell. And when you have the rare opportunity to work with or to see somebody like this in action, do not pass it up. They're incredible. So some of you might be curious what it's like to do this in the real world, which is what we do every day, all year round. And it's something like this. It's what the real world pen testing looks like. And it is, interestingly enough, through an average work week, your sense of self-worth and your number of vulnerabilities found has a very tight correlation. And you think it's funny, this actually happens every single time. Every single time. And I don't know why this is the case.
Then it kind of loops back once you start writing the report.
Yeah. And then when you start writing the report, man, it's like the end of the world. But this is, oddly enough, if any of you are pen testers and can relate, or if you've, you have an interest in the career, this is what it's like. Also, we're hiring. If anybody's interested, definitely let me know. Feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards. We're looking for people. You don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be the advanced. Our company, Stack & Lou, does pen testing for the biggest companies in the world, all the websites that you guys probably use. And we have a lot of fun stuff. We're looking for very talented people who are really interested and passionate about this kind of stuff. And we found UAT to be a really great place for that type of thing. Whether you're interested in pen testing or other aspects of security, please come up and talk to me. Thanks. Any questions? Awesome. Thanks.
All right, wonderful. Stick around. Next up, we'll have Nathan Wagner. His presentation is My Goldfish Bardic and Welcome to New Technology. So he'll be up next. Before you take a break, go check out the Lockpicking Village, and we'll see you in a few.